Welcome to I Am Nala podcast, brought to you by Nala Feminist Collective, or Nala Fem, where we discuss changes needed towards the liberation of African women and girls. Nala Fem is a Pan-African front of feminist leaders with a mission to foster, embolden, and mobilize women and girls from Africa and the diaspora for transformative feminist change. I am Aya Shebi, founder of Nala Fem, and on this first season of I Am Nala podcast, we talk to policymakers and activists to ask what should be done at COP27 taking place in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, in a few weeks. Hello, and welcome again to another episode of I Am Nala podcast. My guests today are Tessy Yue Li, climate activist based in France, and Zuhura Ahmad, a climate activist also, but based in Tanzania. Both very young, 24 years old, and I'm really excited about our conversation today, which will be a dialogue between European and African young feminist perspectives. So welcome, Zuhura and Tessy.
Thank you so much.
So good to have you both.
Thank you so much.
I want to start with giving you some time to tell us your story and who you are, and for people to know more about you and what you do. Zuhura, let's start with you.
Wow, thank you so much. And my name is Zuhura Ahmad from Tanzania. And I'm so privileged, happy, very proud and grateful to be among first in Nala Fem delegation under the support of Malala Fund plus Purposeful. And so I will be in COP to represent young African female voices in climate decision-making discussion with the aim of building meaningful engagement and partnership that will address the pressing environmental issues that are affecting African continent. So my work so far, I work with women program under the Tanzania Biodiversity Organization. I do support and advance gender responsive and transformative implementation of the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework and Gender Plan of Action through capacity building actions to enable youth and women groups to have a meaningful understanding on issues addressed on post-2020 Global Biodiversity Frameworks and ways of their inclusions. So this actually requires addressing gender equity and needs to embrace the holistic solutions and the recognition of women's right to achieve it. And so far, the good news is I have been able to train more than 500 youth and women groups. Also, I am the advocacy manager under the Women in Recycling Foundation. We train and empowering women through recycling activities for them to be able to make the world a better place by having sustainable environment while they earn an income. And the focus area is environment as well as climate change plus gender. Yeah, that's all about me personally.
That's amazing.
Over to you.
Yeah. Very, very, very pleased to have you with us on the podcast. Tessy, tell us your story.
Thank you so much, Aya and Zuhura. I'm really happy to be here with you. So I'm Tessy. I'm Swiss and have Chinese origins. But in the past years, I've been really focusing my work and studies on sort of global North, global South relations. And to that, I'm pursuing a master's degree in the geography and development of the global South. And I've always been sort of active in the climate space. For instance, last year I was delegate for Switzerland at the UN Climate Change Conference of Youth. And this year, along with some friends, I co-founded an initiative called Y Idea, which stands for Youth Intra-Dialogue on Europe and Africa, where we bring together young people across Africa and Europe to research urgent global affairs, such as climate change, but also many others. And within that framework and in partnership with other youth initiatives, we recently organized a conference called the AEYC. That's the African European Youth Conference. And we tackled many different issues. And it was an entirely youth organized conference. And it was us who sort of prescribed the agenda and had these speakers. Some of them were high level, that came from civil society. Others were young people engaged and activists like us. And we produced the Torino Joint Communique, where we sort of documented all the recommendations and demands that we have as youth. And it's sort of within this framework that I am going to COP27 next week in order to represent these findings and, young people across both continents.
So both of you will meet at COP next week, which I'm really excited about that you are connecting here, and also very proud of Zuhura being among the 8 NALAFEM delegation that would be at COP. I want to maybe first get both your perspectives on the Africa-Europe priorities, right? So Africa has its own challenges and its Africa-driven solutions that is putting on the table. And then Europe has its own challenges, contributing to many of the other parts of the world challenges as well, and having its own also, agenda. What do you think are the main points, or what you anticipate to be the main points of debate in COP, of diversion, that leaders will be really not having the similar opinion, and that would be hard to make consensus among them in the negotiation? Obviously, they have now already committed, and there is some common agenda, but there is always, diversion, especially on the green transition of both continents. Tessy, let's start with you.
So that's a great question. And indeed, I think that was also a point of contention during our conference, the AUIC. I think, unfortunately, there's still remnants, or let's say this sort of attitude is still very present, that Europe really sees itself as a beacon within the climate space. Surely, in some aspects, maybe that is justified, but overall, I believe this attitude of wanting to prescribe to Africa what the right policies are, sort of positioning itself as a patronizing force, is very problematic and does not resonate at all with African youth and African countries in general. So I think it's important for sort of European leaders to keep that in mind, to promote the policies that work within the European space, but also not just assuming that that is the default mode that Africa can and wants to operate on.
So do you think, particularly, what would be the debate? Is it more on loss and damage? For example, a lot of African activists are pushing for that to be on the agenda. Do you think it's about the green transition and, the push for Africa to go green right now? And also the definition of what green is, right? Because, we've always been very eco-friendly on the continent until lots of colonization came in and disrupted that. So, also the way we are redefining things of the language that the language Europe is using, and not the same language Africa is using. What do you think particularly would be maybe the points of debate?
So definitely, I believe the discourse that will be pushed is very much green transition, positioning Africa as the space where, okay, this is where we have to innovate, and this is where we will impose all these new green sustainable energy policies, which in a way, surely, that is not just discourse, and there is so much potential within Africa for that. But I also believe that it is sort of just a discourse in a way. Sometimes it does not necessarily align with policies that European countries and the EU have within Africa. And also all of this discourse is sort of happening at the detriment of other aspects of, climate change, such as loss and damages, which in my opinion really has not been highlighted enough.
Zuhura, what do you think?
Okay, thank you for this space. So to add on that, I think the great debate will rely on, and they must put a priority on, nature-based solution, but also the nexus between biodiversity, climate change, and livelihood, also loss and damage, as well as national determined contributions in relation with biodiversity. And lastly, but not least, the relation or integration of gender into climate perspective.
Let's expand on that last one. How do you think this COP should be a feminist COP? How do you think that we can integrate a gender perspective in all of this debate that is very much not intersectional at all, and really focused on very silo solutions?
Okay, thank you for a very good question. I think, to me, we should integrate gender into climate, because climate change, it has been a question mark, especially to the existence of women. Has been affect the mental stress to women. It gives them like excurious sitting, and it makes them like to think their lifestyle, their day to day, and it has been giving them a fear that whatever they do, especially women, isn't enough to protect them from this emergence of climate change. So I think having a gender responsiveness, but also a transformative one into climate would really help to have a policy which is very implementable one.
And what do you think, Tessy? What would be a feminist approach to climate action?
So, as you correctly said, I do believe that especially the COP negotiation space is not necessarily very feminist as it is right now, and it very much works in those silo approaches. So, unfortunately, I'm not really expecting a radical change this time around at this specific COP, but I do believe it's sort of what we can do. It starts with us. We'll be there. I think more young people, but also more women than ever will attend. And, it's not, I would love for that to come from the institutions, that would come from the COP itself, but I believe it'll be more bottom up. It'll be from the young women and the women who are there, who will work to make sure that gender is very much integrated into climate negotiations, and will make sure that women's voices are heard by being there and being very vocal.
Well, the good thing we have the Gender Day, which hopefully can bring all these issues to the surface. So I wanted to ask you, Zuhura, more on a national level context. What is Tanzania's positioning on the topic? Tanzania will be present in COP as the government, but also you as civil society and as young activist voices. What do you think the government currently doing, and what do you think could be doing better or could be improving, or what is the priority that Tanzania should be taken to COP in next week?
I think for the Tanzanian government should prioritize and should put the priorities for the specific case, especially on loss and damage, and making sure that they mobilize for finance, because nothing will happen without finance, and also to insist decisions on implementation on climate action that will constitute success at COP27, because we must have a lot of tangible and implementable outcomes. So the decision that people can point and say that this is being implemented and this is an impact. So I believe that when the government could push for the priorities that will align in terms of nature-based solution, in terms of biodiversity and livelihood, also for the case of loss and damage, it could really help to see on how we are pushing the climate agenda forward.
Tessy, well, you have intersection of different countries. I'm happy to, leave you the freedom to address Switzerland or France or even China, because, sometimes we also get caught up in this Africa-Europe discussion, and there are other players around the world who really have a lot of weight in this conversation. So maybe you can give us your perspective on more like national level kind of agenda.
So I am sort of happy to see that in Europe it has become, let's say, trendy for feminist policies to integrate within, national policies. We see a lot of focus on feminist foreign policy, and I do believe that sort of draws into climate policies as well, which is great. But for now, maybe it's not more than a trend. It's just in its starting position, and it's still being developed. And as far as I can tell, Switzerland and France are not at the forefront of that. But surely, once it's more established, they will have to follow suit. Of course, I would love for them to be more vocal about that, but that is not the case as for now. And for China, I'm not an expert on that, but from what I see, they're not necessarily very at the forefront of feminist policies neither. So that is a bit unfortunate. At the same time, as you say, it is true that they are massive players now, and I think they leverage much of the power they have in important ways. And I think whereas gender is maybe not a priority as of now, I think it's something that can definitely come up in the future. And the names that are given to very important policy negotiations are very political and sometimes not as significant. But for me, the fact that the manifesto, the Beijing 25 plus manifesto is called Beijing manifesto was an important step, and I think could give way to more important steps in the future. At least that's my hope.
Yeah, 100%. And well, France particularly, a France relationship with Africa is a complicated one. And the Francophonie, space in Africa, and especially in the Sahel region, which is the most suffering from climate change, France is very forward about its intervention in the region, right? What do you think, in your opinion, France's positioning should transform into from a COP to another in order to do what it claims to do, which is supporting Africa, right? And which is an equal partnership with the continent and redefining its relationship with the continent. I mean, the two terms of President Macron has been claiming that we have to redefine it, and they even organized the heads of states summit without heads of states. It was all young people, and there was a lot of debate about that also. How do you just bring young people without decision maker? What's the point, right? Because youth are trying to be on the same table with the decision makers and so on. So there have been a lot of attempts, and the Macron tour in Africa and so on. But concretely, when we sit in negotiations, when we put money on the table, when we walk the talk, right? What should France do differently, in your opinion?
That is a really great question, and a very loaded one as well. As someone who studies, geography and global development of the global South, it is a struggle. I see the sort of French attitude towards Africa, especially the Francophone Africa, is so complex, and unfortunately, I believe the tensions are rising. And you can see the crises in the Sahel region. I don't think that the French government is necessarily handling the positions very well. And the discourse that Macron has been putting forward on redefining the partnership, it's the right discourse, but I think it's lacking in action. I do think, as I said before, the sort of old attitudes of patronizing attitude towards Africa and sort of this prescriptive attitudes are still very present. And it needs to be redefined. And I think we use the word partnership, but often it's empty, and we really have to give meaning to that partnership. And here again, whereas we have been sort of disappointed in governmental policies in that, I do think young people have such an important role to play in this. The relationships that we build within young people, sort of empowering each other as well, not to see each other just as the subjects of government, or the objects of government, but really as actors of change as well. I can really see that young people, they need to be more empowered within their role of being the carriers of this partnership, and not just the subjects or the objects of it. And I'm really glad to report that within my work, I really see that young people don't see, whereas they've grown up to be seen as sort of the problem, they really come to understand now that they're the solution. I think that's the case for me, but that's also the case for young Africans, which is just so powerful.
Yeah, I think the methodologies that you use, which is, dialogue and convening, and also in the work you do, Zuhura, you're building a network, you're convening a network. Maybe you can give us some tips and strategies to young activists who are listening to us, and, who are trying against all odds, to do the actual work. A lot of leaders just do the discourse, and the young people are actually doing the impact and the work. What would be your tips and strategies for convening dialogues, for, bringing people together, for building consensus, for coming to a common ground, a common agenda together? What would be maybe your 3 tips for civil society actors on the ground who are trying to do that work in communities, national level, grassroots level, or even regional level? Zuhura?
Okay, thank you so much for this question. So the tips that I can give to young leaders, civil society, and so many more, first and foremost, they need to learn to search for the information. Whenever you get an information, you get an understanding of something, if it is an issue of biodiversity, if it is an issue of an environment, and so it can be very, very easy for you to transform that knowledge that you get to another person. So people need to learn first and foremost. And after learning, the second thing, they need to advocate for that knowledge. It doesn't matter the knowledge that you have, even it is small, it can be help for someone else. So they need to learn. Secondly, they need to advocate. And then the third thing, they need to volunteer. Whatever you see, something that you can help, just do a help. You never know, someone will see your impact and pushing you harder to the place that you wanted to go.
Learn and volunteer. Tessy.
I absolutely agree with Zuhura. Also, I think a great way to convene people, and what is so great about bringing young people together, there is this level of unpretentiousness that often isn't achieved in sort of high-level spaces. And young people just come together, define what they have in common. They don't even necessarily talk about big politics or the really big questions about climate and migration and human rights and what else. It's just people coming together, seeing that have a lot in common, understanding each other on a very human level. And from there on, I think you can sort of build the dialogue to really come to a place where you realize that you're really pulling on the same string, and you can sort of start coordinating action. And with the education that you get, and with the volunteering experience that you make, you can really create something very powerful together.
Absolutely. So as you are going to and preparing yourselves and almost packing, I think, this weekend to go to COP, what is your expectations, right? It's a space of thousands and thousands of people. There is the blue zone, the green zone, there's so much dynamics, right? And so much politics happening, but so much advocacy needed. So my first question is, what is your expectation and what maybe your call to action, right? From the leaders and being there. And then the second one, in going there, what is maybe the song or mantra or sound or something that you're, surviving with in COP and, to the road to COP? What would that be, to keep you motivated, keep the fire in and keep pushing for that week to get things done?
My expectations for COP, it is a bit sad, but I'm trying, as far as the high-level negotiations, to keep my expectations realistic. I was quite disappointed with the results from last year's COP. So everything that is achieved, amazing. But unfortunately, seeing how things are going, I'm not expecting radical change from last year's tone. That being said, I'm very, very excited to meet the people. COP is much more than just the high-level negotiations. There's going to be so many different actors and so many different people convening in one space. And it'll be very exciting to go there, to meet people, to exchange, to learn a lot. I think I've always been curious to be within that space and just soak up as much information as I can. And also, I'm really excited to not just represent myself as a young woman, but also really bring the work that I've been doing with all the amazing people I've met within this year and last year, and really present what we have been working on and the info that I can share. And I guess this will all be very exciting, also a bit overwhelming maybe, but with a friend, whenever we're sort of in a whirlwind of things, we're always we repeat to each other, we out here, we made it out. Up until this point, we'll be in Egypt. We're just gonna try to stay in this positive mindset and be amazed at the fact that we made it this far and really get to do this, and just not try to get lost and just stay within that very high vibrational space.
Amazing. Zuhura?
Okay, my expectation to my end. First, I have been disappointed as well with the results of COP26. But I have only a few specific expectations for the COP27, but clearly decisions on implementation on climate action will constitute success at COP27. We need to know that. Also, we must have a lot of tangible and implementable outcomes. We must have decisions that people can point to and say, this is being implemented and this is the impact. Also, I expect to represent young African female voice in climate and decision-making discussion. Yeah, and the motto is nothing for us without us.
Yes, nothing with us, nothing for us without us. I love it. I want to thank you both for this important and informative discussion. It's great to hear perspective from young feminists from both Africa and Europe who really want the same thing, right? We all just want climate justice. But it's important that from both continents, we have these change makers who are pushing the agenda. And especially when you meet there in the space in Sharm el-Sheikh, and when you push together is much, much more powerful. So thank you both for being with us and sharing your stories. You are listening to I Am Nala podcast. You can find all the episodes on nalafem.org, and see you in the next episode.